The snow fell like a shroud over the Colorado mountains. Each flake another nail in Clara Whitmore's coffin. She stumbled through the white blindness, her torn dress catching on frozen branches that clawed at her like the hands of the dead. Blood seeped through the fabric where thorns had found flesh. But she felt nothing anymore. Not the cold that should have killed her hours ago. Not the rocks that had torn her shoes to ribbons. Not even the weight of her own body as it pitched forward into the unforgiving snow. "Let me die here," she whispered to the howling wind. "Let it end." Her knees gave way, and she collapsed into a drift. The world spun in lazy circles. White sky, white ground, white death. She closed her eyes and waited for the darkness to take her. Better this than what lay behind. Better frozen in these mountains than sold like cattle to pay another man's debts. Through the roar of wind, she heard something else. Hoofbeats, muffled by snow. Her heart seized with terror. Had they found her already? She tried to burrow deeper into the drift, but her limbs wouldn't obey. A shadow fell across her vision. "Damn fool woman." The voice was gruff, unfamiliar. Not the honeyed tones of her late husband's creditors. She forced her eyes open and saw a figure looming above. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in furs that made him look more beast than man. A thick beard covered most of his face, ice crystals glittering in the dark hair. Eyes the color of winter's slate studied her with an expression somewhere between annoyance and concern. Elias Granger had been checking his trap lines when he spotted the splash of color against the white. At first, he'd thought it was a deer, wounded and bleeding. Then he saw the torn fabric, the pale hand stretched toward nothing. His jaw tightened. 20 years in these mountains, and he'd found his share of bodies, prospectors who'd lost their way, settlers who'd underestimated winter's bite, but never a woman, never like this. He knelt beside her, pulling off a glove to check for warmth at her throat. Still alive, though barely. Her skin felt like river stones in January. Up close, he could see she'd been beautiful once. High cheekbones, dark hair now matted with snow and blood. The remains of what had been an expensive dress told him she wasn't from the mountain settlements. City folk. Then, running from something or someone. "Can you hear me?" He didn't expect an answer and didn't get one. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't catch. A name, maybe Samuel, or was it Simon? Didn't matter. What mattered was getting her somewhere warm before the mountains claimed another soul. Elias whistled sharp and low. His horse, a sturdy mountain breed named Brutus, picked his way through the drifts with practiced ease. The animal snorted at the sight of the woman, breath steaming in the frigid air. "Easy, boy. Just another lost thing." He lifted her with effort that had nothing to do with her weight. She felt light as kindling, and everything to do with the awkwardness of maneuvering dead weight in deep snow. She moaned when he settled her across the saddle, a sound so pitiful it stirred something in his chest he'd thought frozen solid years ago. He swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her from sliding off. The ride to his cabin took forever and no time at all. He held her against his chest, sharing what warmth his body could offer through the layers of fur and wool. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling fragments of sentences that painted a picture he didn't want to see. "Please, no. I won't go back. Rather die than—" The cabin materialized from the storm like something from a fever dream, logs dark with age and weather. A stone chimney sending up a pale thread of smoke. It wasn't much, but it had kept him alive through 15 winters. It would have to be enough for her, too. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the wind. The main room was sparse but clean, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserves and supplies. His bed occupied one corner, a simple frame with a straw mattress and heavy quilts. He laid her there, then set about building up the fire until heat rolled through the cabin in waves. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her skin like a death shroud. He hesitated, knowing propriety demanded he leave them, knowing practicality demanded he didn't. Propriety hadn't saved his life in these mountains. It wouldn't save hers either. He worked quickly, professionally, the way he'd once stripped wounded men on battlefields, layer by layer, revealing skin gone pale as mountain ash, bruises blooming like dark flowers along her ribs. His jaw clenched tighter with each discovery. Someone had hurt this woman, and recently, the kind of hurt that went deeper than skin. He wrapped her in his warmest blankets, then set about making medicine from his stores. Willow bark for the fever that would surely come, calendula for the cuts, pine needle tea for strength. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, crushing herbs, heating water, all the while stealing glances at the bed where she lay still as death. She stirred as he was adding wood to the fire, eyes fluttering open without seeing. "Samuel," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Shh." He found himself at her bedside without remembering crossing the room. "No Samuel here. You're safe." Her hand clutched at air, and without thinking, he caught it in his own. Her fingers were ice against his palm. She held on like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. And maybe he was. Her eyes found his face, struggled to focus. "Who?" "Name's Granger, Elias Granger. Found you half dead in the snow." "Dead," she repeated, and something like disappointment crossed her features. "Should have let me—" "None of that." His voice came out harsher than intended. "You're alive, and you'll stay that way if I have anything to say about it." She studied him with eyes the color of autumn honey, seeing too much for someone who should barely see at all. Then her lids grew heavy, and she sank back into unconsciousness, still gripping his hand like a lifeline. Elias sat there long after she'd fallen asleep, watching the firelight play across her face. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them in this wooden cave apart from the world. He should feel trapped, invaded. This was his sanctuary, his penance, and she had no right to bring her troubles here. Instead, he felt something else, something dangerous as spring ice on a river, thin and liable to break under the slightest weight. He pulled his hand free from hers, stood, moved to the other side of the room where he could think clearly. The wind howled through the gaps in the logs, a mournful sound like the mountains themselves were grieving. He'd lived with that sound so long it had become companion and confessor, both. Now, with another heartbeat in his cabin, it sounded different, lonelier. Or maybe that was just him, remembering what it felt like not to be alone. He settled into his chair by the fire, rifle across his knees out of habit more than real concern. Whatever had driven this woman into the mountains in winter, it would have to wait for the storm to break before following. Time enough then to decide what to do about Clara Whitmore and whatever ghosts chased her through the snow. For now, there was only the fire, the storm, and the stranger sleeping in his bed, her presence already changing the cabin's careful silence into something else entirely. Clara woke to the sound of wood being split, a steady rhythm that pulled her from dreams of snow and darkness. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above was rough-hewn logs, not the painted plaster of her Denver home. The bed smelled of pine and leather, not lavender and lies. Then memory crashed over her like an avalanche, and she jerked upright, heart hammering. "Easy there?" The voice came from near the fireplace. The man, Granger, he'd said his name was, sat at a table, cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. He didn't look at her, giving her privacy to collect herself. She pulled the blankets higher, suddenly aware she wore only her chemise beneath them. "My clothes, drying by the fire. Would have killed you otherwise." His tone was matter-of-fact, without apology or interest. "There's a clean shirt on the chair. It'll swim on you, but it's warm." She watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the careful way he handled the weapon. Everything about him spoke of order, discipline, solitude. This was a man who'd arranged his life just so and didn't welcome disruption. Yet here she was, disrupting. "How long have I slept?" 2 days. 2 days. Were they looking for her? Of course they were. Richard Hartley didn't let his investments walk away, especially not when those investments wore skirts and had been promised to settle her late husband's debts. "I should go." "In what shoes?" He finally looked at her. and she saw her boots near the fire, split at the seams, soles worn through. Storm's not done yet anyway. You'd make it maybe 100 yards before freezing solid. She knew he was right, but staying felt dangerous in a different way. This man had saved her life, asked nothing in return, hadn't even questioned her lies when she'd mumbled about being lost. The kindness felt sharp after months of being treated like currency. I can pay you for your trouble. I mean, once I reach town. Don't want your money. Then what do you want? He set down the rifle, considering. You to get well enough to leave. That's all. The next days fell into a pattern strange in its simplicity. Elias, she'd started thinking of him by his given name, kept his distance while ensuring she had everything needed. Hot food appeared at regular intervals. Venison stew, cornbread, pine needle tea that tasted like winter itself, but seemed to restore strength with each sip. He worked outside during daylight hours, giving her privacy to wash and dress in the oversized shirt and trousers he'd provided. She helped where she could, partly from restlessness and partly from a need to prove she wasn't helpless. When he came in with an armload of wood, she had coffee ready. When he tracked snow across the floor, she cleaned it without being asked. He watched these small acts with something like surprise, as if he'd forgotten what it meant to share space with another person. You don't have to do that, he said one evening as she mended a tear in his coat. I like being useful. The needle flashed in the firelight. Never was much good at sitting idle. He made a sound that might have been agreement and went back to his book, one of many that lined a shelf above his bed. She'd been surprised by them. Poetry, philosophy, histories. Not what she'd expected from a mountain hermit. You're educated, she observed. Does that surprise you? Everything about you surprises me. It was the most honest thing she'd said since arriving, and it hung between them like a challenge. He closed the book, marking his place with care. Had a different life once. This suits me better. She recognized the deflection, having perfected it herself. They were both running from something. The difference was he'd found a place to stop. One night, a week into her stay, she woke to find him gone. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Through the window, she could see him standing in the snow, shirtless despite the cold. Moonlight revealed what darkness and clothing had hidden. A scar that ran from his left shoulder blade nearly to his waist, puckered and ugly even from a distance. She watched, transfixed, as he scooped snow and rubbed it over his skin like penance. His breath came in controlled puffs, the only sign the cold affected him at all. When he turned toward the cabin, she quickly lay back down, closing her eyes as the door opened. He moved quietly, banking the fire, adding another log. She heard him pause by her bed, felt him adjust the blanket that had slipped from her shoulder. His hand lingered a moment, and she held her breath, but then he was gone, settling into his makeshift bed by the hearth. The scar haunted her thoughts. What could leave such a mark? And why stand half naked in winter as if punishing himself for some remembered sin? She'd thought him untouchable in his mountain fortress, but that scar spoke of vulnerability, of a past that still drew blood. The next morning brought awkwardness. He seemed to sense she'd seen him, moving with more careful distance than before. She wanted to say something, to offer the same lack of judgment he'd shown her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she busied herself with breakfast, frying salt pork and the last of the eggs he'd traded for down at the settlement. When she set the plate before him, their fingers brushed. He jerked back as if burned. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something raw in his gray eyes before he shuddered it away. Nothing to be sorry for, but there was. Sorry for bringing her complications into his ordered life. Sorry for the lies that sat between them like stones. Sorry for the way her heart stuttered when he walked through the door each evening. Snow in his hair and color in his cheeks from the cold. She was a widow barely 6 months, fleeing a marriage arranged to pay debts not her own, harboring feelings for a stranger who'd shown her more kindness in a week than she'd known in years. If that wasn't worth apology. What was? "The storm's breaking," he said, changing the subject with his usual efficiency. "Another day or two, the pass might be clear enough to travel." "Oh." The word came out smaller than intended. "That's good. I'll take you down to Fort Collins. You can catch a stage from there to wherever you're heading." Wherever she was heading. As if she had any idea. As if there was anywhere to go that Richard wouldn't find her. Wouldn't drag her back to settle Samuel's debts with her body and what remained of her soul. "Yes," she lied. "That would be... thank you." He nodded. The matter settled in his mind. She turned back to the stove, vision blurring. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows like bones. She found herself praying for another storm, another week, another month. Anything to delay the moment when she'd have to leave this strange sanctuary and face whatever waited beyond the mountains. That night, as they sat by the fire, him reading, her pretending to mend, she gathered courage to ask what she'd wondered since the first day. "Why do you live alone out here?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of stones. "It's what I deserve. No one deserves to be alone. You don't know what I've done, and you don't know what I've done, but you took me in anyway." He looked at her across the flickering light, and for a moment, the careful distance dropped away. She saw him then. Not the mountain hermit, not the capable stranger who'd saved her life, but a man carrying wounds that had never properly healed. "That's different," he said softly. "Is it?" Neither of them had an answer for that. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney like prayers. Outside, the snow continued to fall, as if the mountain itself conspired to keep them suspended in this moment. Two damaged souls sharing warmth against the cold, pretending they weren't already half in love with the peace they'd found in each other's silence. The days stretched into something resembling normalcy. If normal could include a widow and a hermit sharing a cabin while snow buried the world outside. Clara found herself falling into the rhythm of Elias's life with surprising ease. Morning coffee before dawn, watching him head out to check trap lines while she tended the fire. Afternoon spent in companionable silence, her mending or cooking while he worked leather or maintained his tools. Evenings by the fire, where conversation came easier as darkness provided cover for truths too sharp for daylight. She learned the cabin's quirks, which floorboard creaked, where the wind whistled through the chinks, how to bank the fire just so to keep it burning through the night. More than that, she learned him, how he took his coffee black as tar, the way he unconsciously rubbed his shoulder when the weather turned, his habit of checking the windows before bed, a ritual that spoke of old vigilance never quite abandoned. "Let me help with that," she said one morning, watching him struggle to patch a hole in the roof one-handed, favoring his scarred shoulder. "I've managed fine for years, and I'm here now." She took the hammer from his hand before he could protest. "Hold the board steady." They worked together in the cold morning air, their breath mingling in white clouds. When her fingers fumbled with the nails, numb from cold, he covered them with his own, warming them with careful friction. The touch sent heat through her that had nothing to do with temperature. "Thank you," she whispered. He pulled away as if remembering himself. "You'll catch your death. Go inside." But she saw the way his eyes lingered on her, the way his hand flexed as if missing the contact. Whatever walls he'd built around himself, she was finding the cracks. That evening, she made biscuits with the last of the flour, pride swelling when his eyes closed in appreciation at the first bite. "Been a long time since I had anything this good. How long have you lived here alone?" 6 years come spring. And before that, he set down his fork, that familiar shadow crossing his features. "Before that, I was someone else." She wanted to press, but something in his expression warned her off. Instead, she told him about her own life, carefully edited versions that skirted around the worst of it. Her childhood in Ohio, her father's general store, the young man who'd courted her with promises he couldn't keep. Samuel was charming, she said, surprised to find the name no longer cut her tongue. Handsome, ambitious, said all the right things. My father warned me about men who smiled too much. But I was 18 and thought I knew better. We all make mistakes when we're young. Some mistakes follow you longer than others. Their eyes met across the table, understanding passing between them, wordless as smoke. Whatever had driven him to this mountain, whatever had carved that terrible scar, it lived in him still, just as Samuel's legacy lived in her. Later, as she cleared the dishes, she started humming without thinking, an old hymn her mother used to sing. She didn't realize Elias had gone still until she turned to find him staring at her with an expression of raw longing. I'm sorry. Does it bother you? No. His voice came out rough. It's nice. Haven't heard music in a long time. So she hummed while she worked, simple melodies that filled the cabin's silence with something warmer than words. Once, she caught him almost smiling, and the sight made her heart turn over like a key in a lock. The moment that changed everything came 3 weeks into her stay. She was helping him stack wood when a log slipped, heading straight for her foot. He moved faster than thought, catching it and her in the same motion. They ended up pressed against the cabin wall, his arms braced on either side of her, the log forgotten in the snow. They stood frozen, sharing breath, sharing heat. She could see flecks of green in his gray eyes, could count the lines that pain and weather had carved into his face. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she saw the exact moment he remembered why this was impossible. He stepped back, bending to retrieve the fallen wood. You should go inside. Elias, please. She went, but not before catching his wrist, feeling his pulse race beneath her fingers. Running doesn't make it go away, she said softly. Trust me, I've tried. That night, the walls between them felt thinner than the cabin's logs. She lay in his bed. He'd insisted, taking the floor despite her protests, listening to him shift restlessly by the fire. The moon was full, sending silver light through the frost-patterned windows, and she could see his silhouette, sitting up, head in his hands. She rose, bare feet silent on cold wood, and knelt beside him. Tell me. He looked at her, defenses crumbling like spring ice. I was a hired gun, started young, thought I was invincible, got a reputation for never missing. His voice went hollow. One night in Kansas, hired to settle a dispute over cattle. It went bad. There was shooting, chaos. I fired into the dark, heard someone fall. When the smoke cleared, his voice broke. Clara took his hand, holding tight. She was 7. The rancher's daughter came running out when she heard the noise. He pulled in a shuddering breath. They said it wasn't my fault, said it was an accident. But I aimed that gun. I pulled that trigger. And a child died because I was good at killing. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of confession. Clara lifted their joined hands, pressed her lips to his scarred knuckles. You've been punishing yourself ever since. It's not enough, will never be enough. And if she could see you now, living alone, denying yourself any comfort, any connection, would that bring her peace? He looked at her with eyes that gleamed wet in the firelight. None of us deserve the grace we're given, but here we are anyway. She rose up on her knees, framing his face with her hands. His beard was soft beneath her palms, his skin warm. She could feel him trembling, caught between need and the chains of his own making. Clara. Her name was a prayer, a warning, a plea. I know, she whispered. I know we're both broken. I know this is impossible, but just for tonight, couldn't we pretend otherwise? He made a sound like breaking, and then his arms were around her, pulling her against him as if she were the only solid thing in a world gone to smoke. They stayed that way, holding each other in the dying firelight, not speaking because words would only remind them why this couldn't last. When she finally pulled back to look at him, his walls had fallen entirely. She saw the man he'd been before, someone who'd loved laughter, who'd probably danced at barn raisings and smiled easy as breathing. That man was still there, buried beneath 6 years of self-imposed exile. "You're not who you were then," she said softly. "Neither of us is." He touched her face with infinite care, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "What are we doing, Clara?" "Living," she said simply. "For the first time in so long, just living." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as sunrise, soft and careful, tasting of coffee and sorrow and something that might have been hope. His hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed closer, feeling his heart beat wild against her chest. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw wonder in his eyes, as if he'd forgotten kisses could be gentle things. "Stay," he whispered against her lips. "Not just tonight. Stay." She closed her eyes, letting herself imagine it. Winters by this fire. Summers in the meadow she'd glimpsed beyond the trees. Years of simple rhythms and healing silence. But Richard was still out there, still hunting what he considered his property. She couldn't bring that danger to Elias's door. "Ask me again when the snow melts," she said instead, and kissed him once more before returning to bed, leaving him by the fire with new ghosts and old ones, all of them softer now in the wake of her touch. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, and for the first time since she'd stumbled from Samuel's house into the waiting snow, Clara didn't wish for death. She wished for spring. The morning after their kiss dawned bright and sharp, sunlight glinting off snow like scattered diamonds. Clara woke to find Elias already gone, only the warm indent in his chair by the fire showing where he'd spent the night. She dressed quickly in his oversized clothes, then set about making breakfast, needing the familiar ritual to steady her trembling hands. When he returned with fresh game, they moved around each other with new awareness, careful not to touch, yet conscious of every near miss. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the air charged with unspoken words. "We should talk," she finally said as they sat to eat. "Should we?" His voice held forced lightness. "Seems to me talking might ruin a perfectly good breakfast." But she couldn't let it lie, not when she'd felt the promise in his kiss, the desperate hope he'd tried so hard to bury. "Elias, what I said last night was the truth. The snow will melt, and you'll leave." He cut his meat with precise movements. Nothing's changed. Everything had changed, and they both knew it. But she recognized the wall going back up, brick by stubborn brick, and didn't know how to stop it. That evening, as they sat by the fire in their usual spots, him with a book he wasn't reading, her with mending she kept having to redo, she made a decision. If he wouldn't let her past his walls, she'd have to tear down her own first. "I lied to you." The words fell into the quiet like stones into still water. About being lost, about all of it. He set down his book, giving her his full attention. "I know. Samuel died 6 months ago. Heart gave out in the middle of a business meeting at a saloon." She kept her eyes on her hands, the needle moving in steady rhythm. Left behind more debts than assets, the kind of debts that come with interest paid in blood. "Clara," Richard Hartley held most of Samuel's markers, said he'd forgive them all for a simple trade. Her voice went flat, empty of emotion because it was the only way to say it. "Me, in marriage, of course, all very proper and legal. A widow with no family, no recourse. Who'd object?" The needle pricked her finger, a bright bead of blood welling up. She watched it with detached fascination until Elias's hand covered hers, stilling the trembling she hadn't realized had started. "So I ran, took what little money I could find, bought passage on a stage heading west. But Richard has men everywhere. They caught up in Denver. I slipped away during a storm, thought I could lose them in the mountains." A bitter laugh escaped. "City fool, just like you said. You're the bravest person I've ever met." She looked up, startled by the fierce conviction in his voice. His gray eyes blazed with an anger she'd never seen, not the cold withdrawal he used as armor, but something hot and dangerous. "Brave? I'm a coward. I ran instead of fighting. I chose death in the snow over being sold like property, over being used to pay another man's debts. That's not cowardice. Clara, that's survival. His hand tightened on hers, and she felt the tremor run through him, rage carefully contained but burning nonetheless. For a moment, she glimpsed the man he'd been before, the one who'd lived by violence, and understood why he'd exiled himself, not from fear of what he'd done, but fear of what he was still capable of doing. He'll come looking, she said quietly. Men like Richard don't give up easily. I shouldn't have stayed this long, shouldn't have put you at risk. Let him come. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they carried the weight of mountains. She saw him then as others must have once, the hired gun whose name made men reconsider their quarrels. But where that capacity for violence had once destroyed him, now it stood ready to protect. The difference shook her to her core. I won't have blood spilled for me, and I won't have you handed over to a man who sees you as chattel. He released her hand, stood abruptly. You're not leaving. Clara, not to face that alone. You can't just decide, watch me. They stared at each other across the flickering light, wills clashing like steel on steel. Then his shoulders dropped, the fight going out of him as quickly as it had come. Please! The word came out raw, scraped from someplace deep. I couldn't live with another death on my conscience, but knowing I'd sent you back to that, it would be worse. So please, stay until we figure out another way. The naked vulnerability in his voice undid her. She rose, crossed to where he stood, and placed her hand over his heart. It beat wild beneath her palm, betraying the calm he fought to project. I'm not your redemption, Elias. No. He covered her hand with his. But you're the first reason I've had to want it. This time when they kissed, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, full of the fear that time was running out, that the world beyond the mountains would find them no matter how deep they hid. His hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed against him, trying to memorize the solid warmth of him, the way he smelled of pine and leather and safety. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own need reflected in his eyes. Not just desire, though that burned there too, but the need to not be alone anymore, to stop running from connection even if connection meant risk. Clara, he said, voice rough, I need you to understand. What I feel, it's not gratitude or proximity or loneliness. She pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping words that would make leaving impossible. I know. Me too. They stood there in the firelight, foreheads touching, sharing breath and heartbeats, and the terrible knowledge that love had found them at the worst possible moment. Outside, an owl called, lonely in the darkness. The sound seemed to break the spell, and Elias stepped back, though his hand lingered on her cheek. We need a plan. Come spring. We could head north to Montana territory. I know people there, from before. They wouldn't ask questions. And live like fugitives forever? Live free. He corrected. Together. The word hung between them like a promise, fragile and perfect. She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe they could outrun the past and build something new in untamed country. But she knew Richard, knew the reach of his connections, the depth of his entitlement. He'd bought her fair and square in his mind, and he'd never stop looking. Let's not make plans tonight, she said instead. Tonight, just be here with me. So they sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and pretended the world beyond the cabin didn't exist. He told her about the mountains in summer, meadows full of wildflowers, streams running clear and cold, eagles riding thermals up where the air grew thin. She told him about her mother's garden, the cat she'd had as a child, the dreams she'd harbored before Samuel's charm had twisted them into nightmares. They talked until the fire burned low, until words gave way to comfortable silence, until she felt her eyes growing heavy. When he moved to take his usual spot on the floor, she caught his hand. Stay with me, just to sleep. I don't want to be alone tonight. He hesitated, honor warring with need, before nodding slowly. They lay together fully clothed atop the quilts, her back to his chest, his arm protective around her waist. She felt his breath stir her hair, felt the careful distance he maintained even in closeness. Elias. Thank you for saving me, for seeing me as more than a debt to be paid. His arm tightened fractionally. You saved yourself. Clara, I just gave you shelter from the storm. But they both knew it was more than that. In this cabin at the end of the world, they'd found what neither had been looking for, a chance at redemption, at connection, at a love that bloomed despite the frost. Whether it could survive the coming thaw remained to be seen, but for tonight, with his heartbeat steady against her back and his warmth chasing away 6 months of cold, it was enough. I don't want to be saved tonight, she whispered, echoing words she hadn't yet said but felt in every fiber. Not from the storm, not from Richard, not even from the broken pieces of herself. Tonight, she just wanted to be held by a man who saw her truly and wanted her anyway. His lips brushed her hair in answer, and they lay there as the wind sang lonesome songs outside. Two damaged souls finding wholeness in each other's arms, stealing what peace they could before the world came calling. Dawn came like judgment, sharp and unforgiving through the frost-etched windows. Clara woke alone, the warmth beside her replaced by cold emptiness. She found Elias outside, splitting wood with violent precision, each swing of the axe punctuating some internal argument she could read in the rigid line of his shoulders. You're avoiding me, she said, wrapping a blanket around herself against the morning chill. He didn't turn. Just getting an early start. Elias, it was a mistake. The axe bit deep into wood. Last night, letting you get close, it won't happen again. The words stung worse than the cold. She'd known he'd retreat, had felt it in the careful way he'd held her, like she might shatter or disappear. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. So that's it? You're just going to pretend nothing's changed? He finally faced her, and she saw the war in his eyes, desire battling duty, need fighting against some misguided notion of protection. What changed? You're still running from a man who thinks he owns you. I'm still a killer hiding from what I've done. Neither of us has any business dragging the other deeper into our mess. That's not your choice to make for me. Isn't it? He gestured at the cabin, the mountains, the life he'd built in exile. Look around. Clara, this is what I have to offer. Isolation, always looking over your shoulder. Is that really better than... Yes. The word cracked like a whip between them. Any life I choose is better than being sold to pay a dead man's debts, even if that life is just these 4 walls and you too stubborn to admit you care. Something broke in his expression, the mask slipping to show the anguish beneath. He dropped the axe, crossed to her in 3 strides, but stopped just out of reach, close enough to feel his heat, far enough to maintain the wall he was desperately trying to rebuild. Caring about you is exactly why we can't. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. I've been dead inside for 6 years. Clara, dead and buried and glad of it, because feeling nothing meant I couldn't hurt anyone else. Then you show up, half frozen and fighting to live, and suddenly, I'm alive again. Do you know how terrifying that is, to want something after so long? Her heart twisted at the raw confession. She reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. No, listen to me. When spring comes, and it will come, you need to leave, find somewhere safe, start over, without me. And if I refuse, then I'll take you to Fort Collins myself and put you on the first stage heading anywhere but here. They stood in the bright morning, breath misting between them, everything unsaid hanging heavier than the spoken words. Then Clara straightened, drawing the blanket tighter like armor. Fine, if that's what you want. She turned back to the cabin, paused at the door. But you're wrong about one thing. Elias, you're not dead inside. A dead man wouldn't be fighting this hard to protect someone he claims not to care about. The days that followed were agony. They moved around each other like ghosts, polite and distant, each hyper-aware of the other's every movement. Clara threw herself into household tasks, organizing his meager supplies, mending everything twice, cooking elaborate meals from simple ingredients just to keep her hands busy. Elias spent longer outside, returning only when darkness forced him in, covered in snow and exhaustion. But the cabin was too small for complete avoidance. Their hands would brush, reaching for the coffee pot. She'd look up from her sewing to find him watching her with hungry eyes before he quickly looked away. At night, she lay in his bed while he kept vigil by the fire, and the space between them ached like a missing limb. 4 days into this careful dance, Clara cracked. She was peeling potatoes for supper when the knife slipped, slicing deep into her palm. She gasped, more from surprise than pain, blood welling bright between her fingers. Elias was there instantly, taking her hand with gentle efficiency. "Let me see. It's nothing. It's not nothing." He led her to the table, retrieved his medical supplies with practiced movements. As he cleaned the wound, she studied his bent head, the careful way he touched her despite the distance he'd imposed. "This has to stop," she said quietly. His hand stilled. "The bleeding will stop once I wrap it. Not that us pretending we don't feel what we feel. Clara, I know you think you're protecting me, but you're not. You're just making us both miserable." She caught his face with her free hand, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for forever. I'm just asking for honesty. Right now. In this moment." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch despite himself. "You deserve better than moments. Maybe, but moments are what we have." When he opened his eyes, the wall had crumbled entirely. He finished bandaging her hand in silence, but his touch lingered, thumb tracing the lines of her palm like he was reading her future there. "I dream about you," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Every night since you arrived, and every morning I wake up terrified it's real, because wanting you feels like betraying everything I've done to atone. Your atonement doesn't require loneliness. Elias, it doesn't require you to punish yourself forever. Doesn't it?" He looked at her with eyes that held too much pain. "That little girl will never grow up, never fall in love, never have moments like this. How do I deserve what she'll never have?" Clara turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. "By living, by choosing to be better, by letting yourself heal so you can help others heal." She brought their joined hands to her chest, let him feel her heartbeat. "By letting someone love you despite your scars." The word hung between them. Love. Too big for the small cabin, too dangerous for two people with so much to lose, but it was truth, and Clara was tired of lies. "I do, you know," she continued, brave in the face of his stunned silence. "Love you. Not because you saved me, not because you're my shelter from the storm, but because you're good, even when you don't believe it. Because you're gentle when the world taught you to be hard. Because you make me want to be brave enough for both of us." He made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and then she was in his arms, his mouth on hers with desperate hunger. This kiss was nothing like their others. It was raw need and aching tenderness. 6 years of isolation crumbling beneath the weight of connection. His hands tangled in her hair, and she pressed against him, trying to bridge every careful inch he'd put between them. When they broke apart, both shaking, he rested his forehead against hers. "Clara, Shh." She placed a finger over his lips. "I know, you don't have to say it." But he caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart hammered wild. "Yes, I do. I love you. God help me. I love you more than I thought possible. And that terrifies me more than dying." "Then be terrified," she whispered. "Be terrified and love me anyway." This time when they came together, there was no hesitation. Just two broken people choosing wholeness, choosing each other despite the dawn that would inevitably come. He carried her to the bed, their bed now, no more pretense, and they lost themselves in each other with the desperate passion of those who know time is precious and fleeting. Later, as they lay entwined, her head on his chest listening to his steadying heartbeat, Clara felt peace for the first time in months. Outside, snow began to fall again, as if nature itself conspired to give them more time. "Spring will come," Elias murmured into her hair. "I know." He'll come looking. I know that too. His arms tightened around her. I won't let him take you. She lifted her head to look at him. Seeing the promise there, the shift from running to standing ground, it should have frightened her, the potential for violence, for the past to repeat itself. Instead, she felt only certainty. We'll face it together, she said. Whatever comes. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, soft, reverent touches that spoke of wonder and fear and determination all at once. Together, he agreed, and in that moment, with the snow falling soft outside and the fire crackling warm within, it felt like enough. They'd stolen this time from a world that would deny them everything, carved out a space where love could bloom despite the frost. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles, but tonight they had each other, and that was more than either had dared hope for. No more walls, Clara asked, already knowing the answer in the way he held her. No more walls, Elias confirmed. For whatever time we have. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was real. Complicated, dangerous, and theirs. And as sleep finally took them, wrapped in each other's arms while winter held the world at bay, both knew that whatever price they'd pay for these stolen moments would be worth it. The morning came wrapped in false peace. Clara hummed as she prepared breakfast, wearing one of Elias's shirts that fell to her knees, her hair loose around her shoulders. He sat at the table, pretending to mend a bridle but mostly watching her move about the cabin like she belonged there, had always belonged there. You're staring, she said without turning around. Am I? He didn't bother denying it. Can't say I mind the view. She laughed, a sound that had become common in the past week since they'd torn down the walls between them. Each day had been a gift, teaching her to track deer, her teaching him to laugh again, both learning the language of touches and glances that said everything words couldn't capture. The larder's getting low, she observed, checking their supplies. We'll need to go to the settlement soon. Tomorrow, maybe, if the weather holds. He set aside the bridle, rising to wrap his arms around her from behind. Or we could just live on love and melted snow. Pretty words won't fill our bellies, Mr. Granger. No? He nuzzled her neck, making her shiver. Seems to be working so far. She turned in his arms, spatula still in hand, trying for stern but failing when she saw the lightness in his eyes. He looked younger these days, as if loving her had rolled back years of self-imposed penance. She reached up to trace the laugh lines that had appeared at the corners of his eyes, new markers of joy rather than pain. I love you, she said, because she could now, because each time still made him look at her with wonder. Clara, he began, but the words died as his body went rigid. She felt the change instantly, from lover to warrior in a heartbeat. His hand moved to the rifle by the door before she even heard what had alerted him. Horses, multiple horses, picking their way up the mountain path. Get dressed, he said, voice calm but urgent. Quickly now. She didn't argue, didn't panic. They discussed this possibility, planned for it even while hoping it would never come. She pulled on the heavy skirts she'd arrived in, now mended and clean, and twisted her hair into a severe bun. By the time the horses stopped outside, she looked like the proper widow again, though her hands trembled as she smoothed her skirts. Elias checked the rifle's load, then the pistol at his hip. Stay behind me. No matter what happens, stay behind me. The knock came, civilized, almost polite, as if destruction announced itself with manners. Open up. Granger. We know she's in there. Clara's blood froze, not just because they'd found her, but because they knew Elias's name. How long had they been watching? What else did they know? Elias opened the door, rifle casual in his hands but ready. Gentlemen, bit far from civilization, aren't you? Richard Hartley sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, expensive coat and boots marking him as foreign to these mountains as Clara had been. He was handsome in the way poisonous flowers were, attractive until you got close enough to see the danger. Two hired men flanked him, hands resting on their guns with practiced ease. Mr. Granger. Richard's smile was all teeth, Or should I say, Elias Deadeye Granger. Quite the reputation you had before you developed a conscience. That was a long time ago. 6 years, to be precise. Right around the time a little girl in Kansas caught a stray bullet? Richard's smile widened at Elias's flinch. Oh yes, I do my research. Especially when my property takes shelter with notorious killers. I'm not your property. Clara stepped out from behind Elias despite his attempt to block her. I'm Samuel's widow. Nothing more. Ah, Clara. Richard's eyes traveled over her with possessive satisfaction. You've led me quite a chase, but surely you knew I'd find you. A woman like you stands out, even in the wilderness, especially when she takes up with hermit gunfighters. What do you want? Hartley? Elias's voice carried the kind of quiet that preceded violence. What's mine? Clara agreed to marry me in exchange for her late husband's debts. A legal contract, witnessed and binding. I'm simply here to collect. I agreed to nothing, Clara spat. You cornered me before Samuel's body was cold. Threatened to sell everything, including my mother's ring, if I didn't comply. That's not agreement. That's extortion. Richard's face darkened. Careful, my dear. Such accusations could be considered slander. Wouldn't want to add legal troubles to your current situation. He gestured meaningfully at the cabin. At Elias. At the obvious impropriety of their arrangement. The threat was clear. Comply. Or he'd destroy what little reputation she had left. Maybe bring the law down on Elias for harboring a runaway woman. Here's what's going to happen, Richard continued, voice reasonable as a snake's. Clara will come with me, peacefully. We'll be married in Denver, all proper and legal, and Mr. Granger here can go back to his hermit life. No harm done. Well, no more harm than he's already done to himself. Like hell, Elias said quietly. I beg your pardon? I said like hell. The lady's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Richard laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The lady? That's rich, coming from you. Tell me, Granger, does she know your full history? Does she know about Tucson? About that family in Amarillo? Or does she just know the convenient parts? The one mistake that sent you running to these mountains like a coward. Clara felt Elias tense beside her, saw his knuckles white on the rifle. Whatever Richard was implying, it was designed to hurt, to drive a wedge between them. I know enough, she said firmly. I know he's twice the man you'll ever be. Man? Richard's voice dripped contempt. He's a killer who got soft, and you're a desperate widow who spread her legs for the first man to show her kindness. Neither of you has any moral ground to stand on. The words hung in the cold air like poison. Clara felt them hit Elias like physical blows, each one calculated to remind him why he didn't deserve happiness, why he should let her go. She saw him wavering, that terrible honor of his rising to the surface. No, she said forcefully. Don't you dare. Don't you dare let him make you doubt us. She grabbed Elias's free hand, anchoring him to her, to the present, to the truth of what they'd built together. His eyes met hers, and she saw the moment he chose her over his guilt. You need to leave, Elias told Richard. Now, while you still can. Threatening me. How unlike the new, reformed Granger. Richard nodded to his men. Did you know there's still a bounty on your head in 3 territories? Amazing how that Kansas incident made people forget you were wanted elsewhere. 1 word from me, and you'll hang for crimes that have nothing to do with that poor little girl. Then say it, Elias challenged. Bring the law. Let them come. But Clara stays here of her own free will, and nothing you say changes that. The standoff stretched taut as wire. Clara could feel violence hovering like a storm about to break. One of Richard's men shifted, hand moving toward his gun, and she knew with terrible certainty that blood was seconds away from spilling. I'll go. The words surprised her as much as anyone. Both men turned to stare at her, Elias with betrayal, Richard with satisfaction. Clara, no, on one condition, she continued, meeting Richard's gaze steadily. You leave Elias alone. No bounty hunters, no law, no revenge. You get what you want. Me, in exchange. He gets to live in peace. Clara, don't do this. Elias's voice broke. Please. She squeezed his hand once, then let go, stepping away from his protection. It's the only way. We both know it. Richard's smile was triumphant. Smart woman. You have 5 minutes to gather your things. I need a moment, alone, to say goodbye. 3 minutes, and my men stay right here. Clara nodded, pulling Elias inside the cabin. The moment the door closed, he grabbed her shoulders, eyes wild. You can't go with him. I won't let you. And watch him kill you. Watch you kill again defending me. She touched his face, memorizing every line. I couldn't live with that, any more than you could live with that girl's death. Clara, listen to me. She spoke fast, urgent. This isn't over. I'll go with him, but I'll find a way out. And when I do, I'll come back. Do you hear me? I'll come back to you. He'll never let you go. Then you'll come for me. She pulled him down, kissed him with everything she had, all her love, her promise, her faith that this wasn't the end. You'll heal, and you'll come for me. Not as the man you were, but as the man you are now, the man I love. He crushed her against him, and she felt him shaking, rage and grief and love all warring in his chest. I can't lose you. You won't, no matter where he takes me, no matter what happens. I'm yours. That won't change. Time's up, Richard called. Clara pulled away, grabbed her meager belongings, including the small wooden box Elias had carved for her just days ago. At the door, she turned back. Remember what I said that night by the fire? I don't want to be saved. I want to be chosen. So heal, my love. Heal and choose me. Then she walked out into the bright morning, back straight, head high, every step away from Elias like ripping her heart from her chest. She didn't look back as Richard helped her onto a spare horse. Didn't flinch when he possessively took her reins. But she heard it, the anguished sound Elias made, like something dying. And she held on to that sound, that pain that proved their love was real, as they rode away from the cabin, from happiness, from the only home she'd ever truly known, behind them. Elias stood in the doorway, rifle hanging useless at his side, watching his heart ride away in the custody of a man who'd never understand her worth. The mountains echoed with silence, and for the first time in 6 years, he had a reason to leave them. Clara had chosen to save him. Now it was his turn to choose to save her, not as the killer he'd been, but as the man she'd helped him become. The hunt would begin with a spring thaw. The fever came 3 days after Clara left, as if Elias's body had finally given permission to break. He'd stood in that doorway until the horses disappeared into the tree line, then gone inside and systematically destroyed everything he could reach. Chairs splintered against walls, dishes shattered on the floor. The table where they'd shared meals became kindling. When the rage spent itself, he'd collapsed beside the bed that still smelled of her, and something inside him cracked open. 6 years of frozen grief thawing in a flood that left him shaking on the floor. The bullet wound in his shoulder, barely healed from the first confrontation, tore open again. Infection set in swift and vicious. For days he drifted between waking and dreams, unable to tell which was which. Sometimes Clara was there, cooling his burning forehead with snow-chilled cloths. Sometimes it was the Kansas girl, asking why he got to live when she didn't. Once, he opened his eyes to find a grizzled trapper standing over him, force-feeding him bitter tea that tasted of bark and salvation. Damn fool. The trapper, Josiah, he'd said his name was, muttered, living up here alone is one thing, dying of heartbreak is another. Not heartbreak. Elias managed through cracked lips. No? Then what do you call destroying your cabin like a wounded bear? What do you call letting a scratch fester until it nearly kills you? Josiah changed the poultice on his shoulder with practiced roughness. Seen that woman of yours ride by with Hartley's crew. The whole mountain's talking about it. Granger finally let someone in, then let her go. Didn't let her. She chose to save me. Josiah snorted. And a fine job you're doing honoring that sacrifice. She saved your life just so you could throw it away. The words cut through the fever like cold water. Clara had traded her freedom for his life, and here he was, wasting it on self-pity and infection. She'd told him to heal, to choose her. How could he do that if he died on this cabin floor? "Help me," he rasped. "Please." "Now you're talking sense." It took 2 weeks for the fever to break fully. Another week before Elias could stand without the world spinning. Josiah stayed, brewing medicine, forcing food down his throat, and talking constantly about nothing, weather, trapping, the gossip from the settlements. It was the most human contact Elias had had in years besides Clara, and it reminded him that isolation wasn't strength. It was just another form of running. "Why?" Elias asked one evening as Josiah prepared to leave, shoulder finally healing clean. "Why help me?" The old trapper shouldered his pack, considering. "Because I knew a man once who lost everything to guilt, watched him waste away in these mountains, alone and bitter until the cold took him. When I heard about you up here, thought maybe I could keep history from repeating." He paused at the door. "That woman, she coming back?" "No, I'm going after her." Josiah smiled, the expression creasing his weathered face into a map of hard-won wisdom. "Good. About time these mountains saw the back of you. Just remember, the man who rides down from here better not be the same one who rode up 6 years ago." After Josiah left, Elias surveyed the wreckage of his sanctuary, broken furniture, shattered dishes, memories embedded in every surface. He'd built this place as a tomb for the man he'd been. Now it was time to leave it behind. He began preparing with the same methodical focus that had kept him alive all these years, but now directed toward a different purpose. He repaired what furniture he could, packed what supplies would travel. The books went into oilcloth, too precious to abandon. Clara's forgotten shawl he folded carefully into his pack, a talisman and promise combined. Spring came slowly to the mountains, each day slightly warmer than the last. Elias used the time to plan. Richard would have taken Clara to Denver first. He'd want the marriage legal and binding, all proper documentation to ensure his investment was secure. After that, they'd likely go to Richard's holdings in Kansas, maybe further east where Clara had no chance of escape. But Elias had advantages Richard couldn't know. 6 years of solitude hadn't erased his connections in the shadow world between law and lawlessness. Men who owed him favors, or who simply respected what he'd once been. Men who understood that sometimes justice and law parted ways. He started with letters, sent with trappers heading down mountain. Careful inquiries, feeling out who was still alive, who still remembered Elias Deadeye Granger with something other than fear. The responses came slowly, some sympathetic, some curious, a few warning him that bounties didn't age like wine. They got worse. One letter changed everything. It came from Marcus Webb, a former Pinkerton-turned private investigator who'd once hired Elias for a job they'd both walked away from with scars and mutual respect. Granger. The letter read, "Heard you were asking about Richard Hartley. Man's got a reputation even in Denver. Loans money at rates that make a bank blush. Then collects in flesh when coin runs short. Your lady isn't the first widow he's married for debts. The others, well, they don't last long. Accidents, they say, convenient ones that leave him with their property free and clear. If she matters to you, don't wait. Spring wedding season starts in 2 weeks. Marcus." Elias read the letter 3 times, each word stoking a cold fire in his chest. Not rage. Rage was hot and stupid and got people killed. This was something else, something that had been tempered in 6 years of mountain winters. Purpose. He saddled Brutus on the first clear morning in April, when the snow had retreated enough to show patches of earth beneath. The cabin stood empty behind him, door open to let the wilderness reclaim what had always belonged to it. He'd thought about burning it, but Clara had been happy there. Let it stand as monument to that, at least. The ride down the mountain felt like swimming up from deep water. Each mile closer to civilization brought more sounds, more signs of humanity. By the time he reached the first settlement, his nerves were singing with the effort of containing 6 years of solitude into the shape of a man who could walk among people. Elias Granger. The blacksmith breathed when he brought Brutus in for new shoes. "Heard you were dead. Heard wrong." He paid in gold, ignoring the man's curious stare. Need information? Richard Hartley. When's the wedding? Week from Sunday. Way I hear it, big affair. Hartley's invited half of Denver to watch him claim his prize. The blacksmith spat tobacco juice. That poor woman, pretty thing, they say, quiet, doesn't smile much. Of course she didn't smile. She was counting days, waiting for him just as he was riding toward her. The certainty of it steadied him more than any amount of planning. He reached Denver 3 days before the wedding, slipping into the city like a ghost. It had grown in 6 years. More buildings, more people, more noise. But the bones were the same, and he knew how to move through shadows, how to gather information without being seen. Clara was being held at the Hartley mansion on the fashionable side of town. Guards at the gates, bars on the windows, a gilded cage for a bird that belonged to the sky. He watched from a distance, mapping routines, noting weaknesses. Twice he saw her, a pale figure at an upstairs window, and it took every ounce of control not to storm the gates immediately. But this required finesse, not force. The old Elias would have gone in guns blazing, left bodies and called it justice. The man Clara loved needed to be smarter than that. He found allies in unexpected places. Marcus Webb, older now but still sharp as a blade. A few former associates who remembered him with enough fondness to offer aid. Even a judge who'd lost his own daughter to one of Hartley's marriages and wanted nothing more than to see the man brought low. Can't just steal her, Marcus warned over whiskey in a dim saloon. Hartley's got the law in his pocket. You take her by force. You'll both be hunted from here to the Atlantic. Then what do you suggest? Marcus smiled, the expression holding no humor. We play his game, but we change the rules. The plan they hatched was complex, requiring timing and trust and no small amount of luck. But it was better than violence, better than confirming every word Hartley had said about the killer Elias had been. This wasn't about redemption anymore. He'd found that in Clara's arms. This was about choosing her, as she'd chosen him, the night before the wedding. Elias stood across from the Hartley mansion, watching her window. A candle flickered there, once, twice, 3 times. Their old signal from the cabin, when one would go out to check the trap lines. She knew he was there. She was ready. Tomorrow, Richard Hartley would learn what happened when you mistook gentleness for weakness, when you assumed a man who'd chosen peace couldn't choose war if the cause was right. Tomorrow, Clara would be free. Elias touched the small wooden box in his pocket, the one she'd taken with her, now retrieved through careful negotiation with a sympathetic housemaid. Inside was a simple gold ring, bought with the last of his gold, engraved with a single word, chosen. Hold on, my love, he whispered to the flickering candle. I'm coming. The mountain man was gone. In his place stood someone new, not the killer he'd been or the hermit he'd become, but a man who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in pulling a trigger. It was in laying down your guns and picking up hope instead. One more dawn. Then their real story could begin. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself mocked the farce about to unfold. Clara stood before the mirror in her borrowed finery, white silk and lace that felt like burial shrouds against her skin. The housemaid, Sarah, fussed with her hair, but Clara barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the window, on the street below where she knew he waited. You're trembling, miss, Sarah whispered, pins between her teeth. Wedding nerves. Something like that. Clara caught the girl's hand. Sarah, when the ceremony begins, I need you to do exactly as we discussed, no matter what happens. Sarah nodded, eyes bright with conspiracy. She'd lost a sister to one of Richard's previous marriages and jumped at the chance for even small revenge. The side door will be unlocked. Everything else is ready. Down in the street, Elias checked his pocket watch. 10 o'clock. The ceremony was set for noon, but the plan would begin much sooner. He nodded to Marcus, positioned at the corner, who signaled the judge waiting in his chambers. All the pieces were in place. The first disruption came at 10:30. A UA. Marshal arrived at the Hartley mansion with a warrant, not for arrest, but for questioning regarding the suspicious deaths of Richard's previous wives. The timing was perfect, just as guests began arriving for the wedding. "This is outrageous!" Richard's voice carried into the street. "On my wedding day? Justice doesn't keep social calendars. Mr. Hartley," the marshal replied calmly. He was one of the few clean lawmen in Denver, carefully chosen for this moment. "You can answer questions here or at my office. Your choice." While Richard raged and threatened, Clara slipped away from her guardians, Sarah creating a distraction with a conveniently dropped tray of champagne. The side door was indeed unlocked, and Clara found herself in the garden, heart hammering as she lifted her heavy skirts and ran. Elias met her at the garden gate, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. 3 months of separation collapsed into nothing. She flew into his arms, and he caught her, spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. "You came," she breathed against his neck. "I knew you would. Had to. You chose me, remember?" He set her down but kept her close, drinking in the sight of her. "We need to move. The marshal can't delay him long." But Clara shook her head. "No, we're doing this properly." That's when Elias understood the genius of the plan's final phase. Not just escape, transformation. They hurried through the streets to the courthouse, where Judge Morrison waited with Marcus and 2 other witnesses, the same judge who'd lost his daughter, who wanted to see Richard's hold broken legally and completely. "Are you certain?" the judge asked Clara. "Once this is done, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything." She turned to Elias, took his hands. "I was promised a wedding today, just not to the groom everyone expected." What followed was the simplest ceremony Denver had ever seen. No crowds, no finery that mattered. Just 2 people speaking vows they'd already been living. When the judge asked for rings, Elias produced the simple gold band, slipping it onto Clara's finger with hands that trembled only slightly. "With this ring, I choose you," he said, improvising vows that meant more than any traditional words. "Not because you need saving, not because I need redemption, but because you are my home, wherever that may be." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "With this ring, I choose you," she echoed, using the plain silver band Sarah had smuggled out. "Not for shelter from storms, but as my partner in facing them, not for the man you were or might become, but for who you are, right now, always. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado." Judge Morrison intoned with deep satisfaction. "I pronounce you husband and wife, and may God have mercy on anyone who tries to separate you." They signed the documents with steady hands. Clara Whitmore Granger, Elias Jacob Granger, legal, binding, unbreakable. The church bells were ringing noon when Richard Hartley discovered his bride had vanished. By the time he'd torn apart the mansion searching for her, word had already spread through Denver society. The widow Whitmore had married, just not him. The scandal was delicious, the humiliation complete. "Find them!" Richard raged to his hired men. "I don't care what it costs." But Elias had planned for this too. While Richard's men searched the train stations and stage depots, the newlyweds were already heading north on horseback. Taking mountain paths Elias knew like breathing, they rode hard but not recklessly, stopping only when necessary, always watching their back trail. 3 days out of Denver, at a trading post near the Wyoming border, they finally felt safe enough to rest properly. The owner, another old acquaintance of Elias's, gave them his best room and asked no questions about the bride still wearing remnants of wedding finery beneath a borrowed duster. That night, finally alone as husband and wife, they came together with a desperate tenderness that spoke of separation endured and reunion earned. Later, as they lay entwined, Clara traced the scar on his shoulder, healed now, thanks to her insistence on proper care. "Where do we go now?" she asked. "North? Marcus knows people in Montana territory. We can start fresh there, build something new." He kissed her forehead. "It won't be easy. Richard won't give up quickly. Let him come. He'll find Clara Granger is a very different creature than Clara Whitmore." She propped herself on an elbow, studying his face in the lamplight. "Do you regret it? Leaving your mountain?" "The mountain was a grave. You brought me back to life." He pulled her down for a kiss that said everything else. "Home isn't a place, Clara. It's wherever you are." They reached Montana territory 2 weeks later, as spring painted the grasslands green and endless. The town of Cedar Falls was small but growing, hungry for skilled workers and asking few questions about pasts. Elias found work with a horse breeder who cared more about his way with animals than his history with guns. Clara opened a small school, teaching miners' children their letters and numbers. They built a house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a porch facing the mountains. Clara planted a garden while Elias built furniture, and slowly, carefully, they crafted a life together. Word came occasionally from Denver. Richard's empire had crumbled after investigation into his previous wives' deaths. He'd fled to California, still raging about stolen property, but his reach no longer extended to Montana. "We're free," Clara said one evening, reading Marcus's latest letter. They sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Really, truly free." Elias pulled her close, marveling at the simple pleasure of holding his wife while the day ended peacefully. "You were always free. You just needed to remember it. And you? Are you free?" He considered the question, thinking of the Kansas girl who still visited his dreams sometimes, though less frequently now. She came not as accusation, but as reminder that life was precious, that second chances were rare gifts to be treasured. "I'm working on it," he said honestly. "Every day gets a little easier." Clara lifted his hand, kissed the palm that had once dealt death, now gentle in its touch. "We both are." As darkness settled over Cedar Falls, they went inside to the home they'd built together. The lamp cast warm light over simple furnishings, handmade curtains, books on shelves, a life constructed from love and determination. On the mantel sat the wooden box Elias had carved, now holding both their rings from their first, interrupted wedding. Beside it, a letter from Sarah reporting that she'd found work with a family who treated her well. They'd lost a winter to separation, but gained a lifetime together. The mountain man had found his way down from the heights, not to return to who he'd been, but to become someone new. The widow had refused to be traded or sold, choosing instead to write her own story. Together, they discovered that salvation wasn't about being rescued. It was about 2 broken people choosing to heal together, one day at a time. That night, as they had every night since reuniting, they fell asleep holding each other, no longer afraid of the dawn, no longer running from the past, just 2 souls who'd found home in each other's arms. Proof that even in the wildest frontier, love could bloom despite the harshest ground. Their story had begun with shelter from a storm. It continued now under clear skies, with the promise of all the summers yet to come. And somewhere in the Montana mountains, an empty cabin stood as testament to the winter that changed everything, when a mountain man saved a widow's life, and she saved his soul in return. Thank you all for joining me on this journey through the Colorado mountains and into the hearts of Clara and Elias. I hope their story of redemption, choice, and love against all odds has touched you as much as it did me in the telling. I'd love to know where you're listening to this tale. Are you by a cozy fireplace, on a long drive through your own mountains, or perhaps stealing a quiet moment before bed? Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love and adventure in the American frontier. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Until we meet again around the campfire, may you always choose love, even when the trail seems impossible. Happy trails, partners.